So the second thing that can constrain your time underwater is your decompression obligation or your no decompression limit. So your dive computer is going to give you a no decompression limit, and that is a guide for you for how much decompression stress you can handle. And this can be especially limiting as far as your time constraints go on deep dives, and or if you're doing multiple dives in a day, then you can really rack up decompression stress, and your no decompression limit can be particularly important and short, and constrain your time underwater. So your computer is going to give you this no decompression limit, and it is going to look very black and white and straightforward and convincing. Oh, I've got 5 minutes left until it's time to start heading up. But I cannot emphasize enough that your dive computer doesn't know what is going on inside your body. It is running math to estimate your likely decompression stress. So what do I mean by that? Well, here we have a range of decompression stress. So up in red here, this is symptomatic bubbles causing decompression sickness. And down here in green, we're at ambient pressure. We are not going on a dive at all. So if you don't go scuba diving, you don't get decompression sickness. But an actual dive is going to be somewhere between these extremes, somewhere in this gradient or this spectrum. And the closer you get to decompression sickness, the higher your decompression stress is. And so the dive computer, when it says you have 5 minutes left, it is drawing a line in the sand. It is drawing some line through this spectrum and saying that this is likely to not cause you to have DCS. And the reason I say likely is because there is variability among different people, among a single person across different dives. If you have a single dive, a single profile, there can be a whole range of decompression stresses that you get. One person might have very little stress from a dive, another person might have a lot. And so the computer is figuring out, drawing some line in the sand that is keeping us to the left of this high stress level that would cause decompression sickness. And so it's keeping the probability of any given diver on any given dive having a certain amount of stress less than, or that probability quite low. And so your computer doesn't know what's going on inside your body. So don't treat that as a black and white, just authoritative number for you. There are various factors that will push your decompression stress for you on a given dive to the left and make your decompression stress less, or can push your stress to the right and make the probability of DCS being even higher. So there are lots of different factors that come into play that affect your decompression safety. So of course, dive profile is the one that is drilled into us, right? How deep are you going? Your time, are you doing a safety stop? Your ascent rate, what kind of gas are you breathing? Is it a repetitive dive? But there are other things as well. So there's a whole suite of predispositions that an individual may have, how hydrated you are, your physical fitness, your age, your circulation, your nutrition, your any drugs that you're taking, your health, genetics, epigenetics. Many things can shift you left or right on that spectrum. Exercise, if you are exerting a lot of energy at depth, that is going to push you to the right and make the probability of DCS greater. And we're learning increasingly more that thermal status, how warm or cold you are, can have a strong impact on increasing or decreasing your decompression stress. And so please don't treat that number as as, oh, I still have 1 minute left. I cannot get decompression sickness. Oh, I went over by a minute. I will get decompression sickness. It's not that straightforward, and that's why it is prudent to stay nice and conservative away from that boundary. And I mentioned safety stops. Safety stops are really, really helpful for helping with that decompression stress. These are some data from a study that was conducted by Dan in Europe, and it shows some work that was done on a number of divers, and they all did the same dive. So they all did a dive to 30 meters or 100 feet for 25 minutes. And then they had a nice normal ascent rate and came up to the surface. Now, importantly, nobody here, none of the divers had any symptoms of decompression sickness. But even though you don't have decompression sickness, there are still bubbles in your blood. And so the scale here on the y-axis is the number of bubbles measured in the blood after a certain surface interval. So immediately after the dive, you have some amount of bubbles and they fade off as you get further and further away from the dive. But important to note here, so everybody had the same dive profile, but some divers, those in blue, had a direct ascent with no safety stop. And those divers had a much higher bubble count, in other words, a higher decompression stress, than if you were to do 2 minutes at 3 meters. So that's not even a full, what most people are taught as a safety stop. 2 minutes at 3 meters, which is 3 meters is about 10 feet. And it drastically reduced the bubble count and lowered that decompression stress. If you did staged it a little more, 1 minute at 6 meters, about 18 feet, and 4 minutes at 3 meters or 9 feet, then that decompression stress gets even less. Now you might be wondering, all right, so there's various amounts of decompression stress, but nobody got DCS. Why does it matter? If this is all subclinical, it doesn't cause DCS. Well, how long is a surface interval between dives? Typically, it's going to be somewhere in the 15, 30, 60 minute range. And so if you don't do a safety stop and you head right back into the dive, that can have a big impact on doing repetitive dives. And doing that quick safety stop can really reduce your decompression stress so that your repetitive dives in particular are all the safer and your risk of decompression sickness is much lower. So, coming back to our time constraints, your no decompression limit or your decompression obligation is going to be another factor that constrains your time underwater, and is important to plan out using your dive computer and your brain, thinking through those other factors to decide how long do I want to stay down.